Psalm 3. God strikes down every rising enemy, while you sleep in peace. There are nights when the weight of life presses so heavily on your chest that even breathing feels like an act of courage. In those moments, fear whispers its lies into the darkness. You are surrounded. You will fall. There is no way out. Yet the truth of Psalm 3 cuts through every shadow like divine light. I lay down and slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. This psalm is not merely a cry from David's heart while fleeing from his enemies. It is a timeless revelation of divine protection that extends to every believer who faces unseen battles in the silence of the night. When the world turns against you, when betrayal comes from those closest to you, when your own strength fails, God becomes the fortress that cannot be shaken. Psalm 3 reveals that even in the most vulnerable state, while you sleep, the Almighty is still fighting for you. The psalm begins with anguish and danger, but ends with peace and assurance. It mirrors the journey of every soul that has walked through despair, only to awaken under the covering of divine mercy. This reflection will take you through the deep spiritual lessons of Psalm 3. How God strikes down every enemy rising against you, how his unseen hand sustains you through the night, and how faith turns fear into rest. By the end, you will not only understand this psalm as ancient poetry, but as a living promise written into the core of your destiny. Let us now enter into the first great revelation of Psalm 3, the reality of rising enemies and the unshakable confidence that God's shield surrounds those who trust in him, surrounded by many, yet protected by one. When David wrote Psalm 3, he was fleeing from Absalom, his own son. The pain of betrayal burned deeper than the threat of the sword. Yet in the midst of his anguish, David did not crumble. He turned his fear into prayer. Lord, how are they increased that trouble me? Many are they that rise up against me. His words echo the reality of every believer who feels surrounded by opposition. There are seasons in life when the enemies seem to multiply overnight. Financial struggles, broken relationships, illness, spiritual attacks, all converging at once. Yet David begins his psalm by naming his battle, not to magnify fear, but to position faith. When you acknowledge the battle, you open the door for God to demonstrate his victory. The world teaches us to deny pain, to mask our fears under forced strength, but faith invites us to be honest, to cry out from the depths of despair. God does not need your perfection, he needs your surrender. It was in that raw moment of vulnerability that David discovered divine protection beyond the limits of human defense. The first truth of Psalm 3 is that God's protection does not depend on your circumstances. You can be surrounded by thousands, outnumbered, outmatched, even betrayed, and yet remain untouchable because the shield of the Lord covers you. But you, O Lord, are a shield for me, my glory and the lifter up of my head. That shield is not only external, it is internal. God shields your mind from collapsing under anxiety. He shields your spirit from drowning in despair. To sleep in peace while enemies rise is a supernatural act. It means you have transferred the burden of battle from your hands to his. You no longer fight in your own strength, but rest in his. This is the divine paradox. The believer's greatest power is not found in striving, but in surrender. David could rest not because his situation changed overnight, but because he remembered who surrounded him. The enemies might have surrounded his camp, but God surrounded his soul. There is an unseen army that moves in silence, angels sent by the Word himself, guarding every corner of your existence. You do not see them, but their presence is real, steady, and unbreakable. The reason so many believers fail to find peace is that they forget to rest under that shield. Instead of trusting, they rehearse their pain. Instead of sleeping, they stay awake replaying every threat. But faith whispers, lay down. The moment you surrender control, heaven takes over the battle. The world measures safety by numbers and resources, but the kingdom of God measures it by presence. One believer protected by the Almighty is safer than 1,000 soldiers without him. You may feel outnumbered, but in truth you are never alone. You are surrounded by divine strategy. Every rising enemy is already seen, measured, and disarmed before it even reaches your door. David's confidence was not arrogance, it was revelation. He knew that even as he slept, God did not. The one who watches over Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. That same God watches over you tonight. He stands between you and every unseen arrow. He knows the plans of those who rise against you before they form. And while you rest, he moves. So if you find yourself facing betrayal, rejection, or invisible warfare, remember this. The presence of many enemies only magnifies the greatness of the one who defends you. The greater the storm, the greater the revelation of his peace. Sleep then, not as one defeated, but as one defended. The night is not your enemy, it is your altar of trust. Lay down every fear, every worry, every unspoken anxiety, and rest in the knowledge that your Father is awake, striking down every rising threat while you dwell in safety. When the morning comes, you will awaken not because of your strength, but because of his sustaining grace. That is the miracle of Psalm 3, the power to sleep in peace while surrounded by chaos, and to rise again stronger, untouched, and victorious. If this message has touched your heart, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Join this community of faith, where God's word restores courage, peace, and purpose to every weary soul. The battle you don't see, God fights for you in the silence of the night. There are moments when the battle you face is not fought in daylight, nor does it make noise loud enough for the world to hear. It unfolds quietly in the solitude of your thoughts, when fear visits at midnight and whispers that you are not strong enough to make it through. It's there, in the silence, that Psalm 3 speaks its deepest truth. I lay down and slept, I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. These words reveal a mystery that transcends time, that while you rest, heaven is at war for your peace. The night becomes a holy arena where divine intervention moves unseen, where God himself becomes your defense against every spiritual enemy planning your downfall. The human mind struggles to understand this truth because we are conditioned to believe that peace comes after the battle, not during it. Yet David slept in the midst of danger. His own son sought his life. Betrayal surrounded him. His army was divided. His throne was uncertain. But David did not spend the night pacing in fear. He lay down. He closed his eyes, not because he was unaware of danger, but because he knew who commanded the armies of heaven. The same God who breathed galaxies into existence now stood guard over a fleeing king in the wilderness. The same voice that split the Red Sea now whispered peace into David's trembling soul. When the psalm says, "The Lord sustained me," it means more than mere survival. The Hebrew word used implies ongoing support, a continuous act of divine strength that keeps you upright when everything else collapses. It means that every breath you take in the night is guarded by his mercy. It means that the invisible hand of God upholds you when the visible world falls apart. To truly understand the power of this verse, you must see that sleep represents surrender, not defeat but trust. When you sleep, you let go of control. You stop fighting, stop worrying, stop calculating outcomes. You allow God to take your battles into his realm where his will is done beyond your understanding. While your eyes are closed, he is rewriting stories, silencing accusations, and dismantling every weapon formed against you. Have you ever awakened from a night of despair, only to find peace waiting for you in the morning? That's not coincidence. That's the echo of Psalm 3 in your life. It's the evidence that God has been working while you were resting. The same way a farmer plants seeds and must sleep while growth happens underground, so must you trust that while you rest in faith, miracles germinate in hidden soil. Many believers misunderstand the nature of spiritual warfare. They believe that fighting means constant striving, endless prayers said in panic, or staying awake in fear that something might go wrong. But true warfare begins with stillness, the kind of stillness that terrifies the enemy because it proves your trust is anchored in God's sovereignty. When the forces of darkness see you resting in peace while surrounded by chaos, they realize they've lost control over your spirit. The devil's greatest weapon is fear, but when you refuse to be afraid, you break his power. David's sleep was not an escape. It was a statement of faith. He was declaring, "My enemies may be many, but my defender is one, and he does not fail." You must come to the same conclusion in your own life. It may not be soldiers that surround you, but anxiety, betrayal, financial pressures, or emotional pain. Yet the same God who fought for David fights for you. You do not need to understand how he will do it, only that he will. There are battles you will never know about, because God already won them while you slept. The argument that never happened, the accident that was prevented, the sickness that didn't spread, the opportunity that opened unexpectedly. These are all signs of divine warfare waged on your behalf. The heavens move when a believer decides to trust instead of fear. Every act of surrender becomes an act of spiritual authority. Psalm 3 teaches that divine protection is not passive. It's active and relentless. For you, O Lord, are a shield around me. This shield is not static. It moves with you. It surrounds you in every direction, forming an invisible barrier against both seen and unseen harm. There are countless things in this world that could have destroyed you, but the shield of God intercepted them. How many times have you been spared without knowing? How many arrows fell before reaching you because heaven stood between? While you sleep, the Spirit of God moves like wind, invisible, unstoppable, and deliberate. Angels are dispatched to the corners of your life. The plots of darkness unravel silently. Doors that were meant to trap you are sealed shut. And the same breath that calmed the storm on the Sea of Galilee now whispers peace over your restless heart. David's awakening the next morning was more than physical. It was symbolic of resurrection. I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. It's as if each new dawn proclaims the resurrection power of God, reminding you that nothing can keep his children buried in despair. Every morning you wake up, you are witnessing a miracle, the proof that God still has purpose for you, that your enemies did not prevail, that his mercy renewed itself once again. This truth also teaches us about divine timing. You may not see instant results when you pray, but faith does not require immediacy. It requires endurance. God often fights battles in realms you cannot see because premature revelation would weaken your faith. If you saw the depth of his protection, you would be overwhelmed. So he hides his hand, asking only that you rest in trust. The power of rest is underestimated in spiritual life. When your body is still, but your faith is active, you are engaging in one of the highest forms of worship. It's an act of saying, God, I believe you enough to close my eyes while you handle what I cannot. That level of trust transforms the atmosphere of your life. It invites the peace that surpasses understanding, the peace Jesus promised, the peace that silences storms before they begin. There is something profoundly sacred about the believer's sleep. In Scripture, God often speaks, restores, and reveals in the night. He gave Jacob a vision of heaven's ladder while asleep. He gave Joseph divine instruction in a dream. He strengthened Elijah under the juniper tree while he slept, and he resurrected Jesus after the silence of a tomb. Sleep, therefore, is not abandonment, it is preparation for resurrection. When you rest in faith, God restores your soul for the battles ahead. Think of how David's night changed his destiny. He went to sleep surrounded by enemies, but he woke up surrounded by God's assurance. His circumstances didn't immediately change, but he changed. Fear was replaced by confidence, despair by praise. That's what divine rest produces, not escapism, but empowerment. When your heart finally learns to rest in God, your enemies lose access to your peace. There is a deeper mystery hidden here. Peace is not the absence of war. It is the presence of divine authority. When God's presence fills a space, conflict cannot stay. Your peace is a declaration that your spirit is governed by heaven, not by circumstance. So when you choose to rest, you are not giving up. You are allowing God's dominion to manifest in your life. How many nights has the enemy tried to torment your mind, only for the Spirit to whisper peace? How many moments of darkness were transformed by one verse remembered, one prayer whispered, one tear seen by God? Psalm 3 invites you to recall those nights and to see them not as moments of weakness, but of warfare. Every breath you took while afraid yet still believing was a victory cry in the unseen world. The second half of this psalm reveals God's direct response to faith under pressure. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you have struck all my enemies on the cheekbone. You have broken the teeth of the ungodly. This imagery is powerful. It shows that God's victory is not abstract. He dismantles the strength of those who attack his children. To strike the cheekbone and break the teeth means to silence the voice of accusation, to remove the bite of slander, to render powerless those who seek to harm. Notice that David didn't say, I struck my enemies. He said, you struck them. The battle belongs to the Lord. The moment you stop defending yourself, God begins to defend you. He will silence every voice raised against you, not with argument, but with divine justice. The shield that protects you also strikes for you. Sometimes God allows enemies to rise so that his power can be revealed in new dimensions. Without opposition, you would never know his deliverance. Without the night, you would never know the sustaining light of dawn. The presence of enemies is not proof of God's absence, it's proof of your anointing. The more intense the warfare, the greater the destiny waiting beyond it. David's journey through Psalm 3 reminds us that no enemy can outlast divine endurance. The Lord sustains his chosen not for a season, but for a lifetime. The very breath that woke David is the same breath that keeps you alive today. Each heartbeat is a divine statement. You are not finished yet. God sustains you not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. When the weight of the world feels too heavy, his unseen strength lifts you. There will be nights when all you can do is whisper, Lord, sustain me, and that whisper is enough. God hears what the world never will, the cries uttered from the soul in darkness. He responds not with noise, but with movement. He shifts circumstances silently as the dawn approaches unnoticed until it fills the sky. Every believer must learn to honor the night. It is not only a time of rest, but of revelation. In the quiet hours, when everything else fades, your spirit becomes more aware of divine presence. It's there that your faith is refined, your fears are confronted, and your intimacy with God deepens. Psalm 3 does not promise a life free of danger. It promises peace within danger. If you ever wonder whether God sees your struggle, remember this. He not only sees it, he enters it. He walks through the night beside you. He stands over your bed as you sleep. He guards your breath and stills your racing thoughts. His presence fills the room where fear once lived. And as the first light of morning touches your face, it is a divine reminder that his faithfulness has carried you once more from darkness into light. That's why David could say with confidence, I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me round about. Such faith doesn't arise from ignorance of danger, but from revelation of divine protection. Once you've experienced God fighting for you in the unseen, no visible threat can shake you again. The memory of his deliverance becomes your permanent shield. Your peace terrifies the enemy. Every night you rest without fear. Every morning you rise with gratitude. You testify to a power greater than any darkness. The devil can attack your circumstances, but not your destiny. He can surround you, but he cannot touch the presence that surrounds you. The greatest victory of Psalm 3 is not that the enemies fell, but that David slept. It is one thing for God to strike down enemies. It is another for your heart to find peace while he does. That is the essence of divine trust. That is what transforms suffering into testimony. So tonight, when you lie down, remember, your bed is an altar, your sleep is a prayer, and your awakening is a resurrection. You are protected not because of who you are, but because of whose you are. The Lord sustains you, and no power in heaven or hell can interrupt his watch. Rest then, child of God. Rest in the confidence that the battle is not yours to fight, but his to finish. The night will not harm you, it will heal you. For even as you sleep, the one who holds the stars in place is holding you. If this message strengthened your faith, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, so you can continue to receive words that restore peace, awaken trust, and remind your soul that God is still fighting for you, even in the silence of the night. When fear speaks loud, faith must speak louder. Fear is an ancient voice. It knows how to disguise itself in logic, in caution, in realism. It speaks when you are alone. It whispers when you lie in bed, and it tries to convince you that you are helpless, that you are forgotten, abandoned, surrounded with no rescue in sight. In Psalm 3, David faced this voice not only from external enemies, but from within his own heart. Many there be which say of my soul, there is no help for him in God. But these words capture the most dangerous attack any believer can face, the suggestion that God will not come through. It is one thing to face opposition from the outside. It is another to hear the echo of despair rising from within. That is what fear does. It tries to rewrite your faith, to persuade you that the promises of God have expired in your life. Yet Psalm 3 refuses to yield. In its poetic defiance, faith rises above fear and declares, "But you, O Lord, are a shield for me." This is not denial of danger. It is defiance against despair. Faith does not silence fear by ignoring it. Faith silences fear by outspeaking it. Fear says, "You are outnumbered." Faith says, "One with God is a majority." Fear says, "You will not recover." Faith says, "The Lord sustains me." Fear says, "You are surrounded." Faith says, "God's angels surround those who trust in him." Every believer will come to a moment where these voices collide. What determines the outcome of your battle is not the presence of fear, but the persistence of faith. Even David felt the tremor of terror. He was human, yet he spoke what his soul needed to hear. That's the power of confession. When the night is darkest, your words must become your weapon. In the stillness of your room, when no one else is awake, speak truth aloud. Declare what the psalm declares, "The Lord is my shield." You may not feel protected, but truth does not depend on emotion. Your feelings fluctuate, but God's character does not. When you speak his promises, you realign your atmosphere to heaven's reality. David's fear was not imaginary. Absalom's rebellion was real. The army chasing him was not a metaphor, it was a death sentence. But faith thrives where circumstances contradict hope. If you only trust God when everything looks stable, that's not faith, that's comfort. Faith is forged when you have no control left, when you are forced to rely entirely on the unseen. The words, "I lay down and slept," are therefore not ordinary, they are revolutionary. They declare that peace is possible in the presence of fear. The world cannot comprehend that. It seeks peace through control, through certainty, through guarantees. But divine peace surpasses understanding. It exists precisely when nothing makes sense. There is a sacred secret here. Rest is not the opposite of warfare. Rest is the victory of warfare. When you rest, you prove that you believe God more than you believe the threat. You demonstrate to heaven and hell alike that your trust is anchored beyond sight. That kind of faith shifts atmospheres. It commands angels to move. It silences demonic accusation, and it brings calm where chaos reigned. You must learn to speak to your own fear, the same way David did. He never denied the magnitude of his enemies, but he refused to let fear define the outcome. I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me round about. He was saying, even if my fear multiplies, my faith will multiply more. This is the lesson God teaches those he loves. Courage is not the absence of fear, but obedience in spite of it. Faith does not wait for fear to disappear. It decides to move anyway. The true test of your faith is not how loud you sing in daylight, but how deeply you trust in the darkness. When you can rest in a storm, heaven calls that victory. The warfare of the believer is often invisible. It happens in the inner realm, where doubt battles hope, where pain challenges purpose, where silence tests conviction. Yet God sees it all. He is not indifferent to your anxiety. He does not rebuke you for trembling. He invites you to trust in his steadiness. The reason God allows fear to rise is to reveal whether your faith is built on sight or on spirit. If fear can shake it, it was never rooted deeply enough. Every wave of fear is an opportunity to deepen your dependence on God. The more you return to his word, the stronger your internal fortress becomes. And soon, what once terrified you becomes the very ground where you learn to walk with confidence. It is no coincidence that Psalm 3 begins in despair, but ends in triumph. The entire structure of the psalm mirrors the journey of the soul under attack. It begins with fear, passes through faith, and concludes with victory. That is the divine pattern for every believer. You may start weeping, but you will end rejoicing. You may begin surrounded, but you will rise shielded. What makes David's story powerful is not that his circumstances changed overnight. They didn't. It's that his perception changed. He stopped focusing on who surrounded him and began remembering who sustained him. The moment you shift focus from fear to faith, everything begins to change. Not because the world becomes safer, but because you become stronger. Fear often disguises itself as rational thought. It sounds responsible, logical, cautious. It says, you are only being realistic. But faith sees differently. Faith is not blind, it sees beyond. It recognizes that even though the valley of the shadow of death is real, so is the shepherd who walks through it with you. You might be afraid right now, afraid of the future, of loss, of betrayal, of failure. But hear this, fear is a shadow, and shadows only exist because there is light behind them. You are not walking in darkness. You are walking in the projection of something that has already been defeated. Every fear bows before the presence of God. The secret of David's confidence lay in worship. While others planned strategies of war, he sang. Worship shifts your focus from what's happening to who reigns. When you praise God in the middle of chaos, you are declaring that he still rules over it. The sound of your worship is a sound the enemy fears most because it proves he has lost your attention. In spiritual warfare, attention is everything. What you focus on grows in power over you. If you focus on threats, they become larger. If you focus on God, he becomes magnified in your heart. The shield of faith operates by focus. It's not just a defensive tool, but a lens through which you see the world. David's ability to sleep while being hunted reveals a mastery of focus. He chose to see beyond swords to sovereignty. That's what you must learn too. Your peace will never come from external calm. It will come from internal clarity, the knowledge that the same God who rules galaxies rules your circumstances. Fear thrives in forgetfulness. It feeds on spiritual amnesia. When you forget what God has already done for you, The enemy wants you to panic today because you've forgotten yesterday's deliverance. But if you recall the times God rescued you, your spirit will begin to stabilize. Memory is one of the most powerful weapons of faith. Each answered prayer, each narrow escape, each moment of mercy. These are stones in your foundation of trust. In Psalm 3, David remembered. He remembered the lion, the bear, the giant, and every moment God proved faithful. He realized that if God could save him before, he would save him again. That's how faith speaks louder than fear. It builds its voice from testimony. You must do the same. When you feel surrounded, rehearse your victories, not your defeats. The truth is, fear has no creative power. It can only distort what already exists. It cannot create new realities. Only faith can. Fear is noise without substance. Faith is silence with authority. When you speak faith, you release heaven's language into your circumstances. The atmosphere responds to words filled with belief. That's why David's declaration became prophecy. For the Lord sustained me. He spoke it before it was seen, and it became reality. Many believers think faith means denying reality, but it means defying its finality. Faith acknowledges the storm, but refuses to let it dictate destiny. When you say, "God is my shield," you are not pretending there are no arrows. You are proclaiming that the arrows will not reach you. If you've ever faced sleepless nights, you know how loud fear can become. It rehearses every worry, amplifies every mistake, magnifies every threat. Yet Psalm 3 teaches that you can replace those thoughts with divine truth. Each verse is a counterattack. Every word is a sword forged in prayer. That's why Scripture calls the Word of God the sword of the Spirit, because it cuts through the illusions fear builds. In those moments of darkness, you must feed your soul with truth. The human mind cannot host fear and faith at the same time. One will always dominate. Choose which one you feed. Fear grows on neglect. Faith grows on attention. Read, speak and meditate on God's promises until your heart begins to believe again. David's rest was not passive, it was active trust. He didn't merely close his eyes, he opened his soul to God's defense. That's what you must learn to do. When you go to sleep, don't just collapse from exhaustion. Consciously hand your burdens to him. Say, "Lord, I rest because you don't." That single act of faith shifts the entire spiritual atmosphere of your night. There's a beautiful image in the psalm. The transition from night to morning. It mirrors resurrection. Sleep represents surrender to death's shadow. Waking represents victory over it. Every dawn that meets your eyes is a declaration. You are not defeated. God kept you. He fought unseen battles so that you could rise. When David awoke, he didn't simply resume running. He began praising. His first words were not fear, but faith. I awoke, for the Lord sustained me. That's what you must learn. Never start your day with complaint. Start it with gratitude. Morning gratitude builds a fortress for the day. It reminds you that if God carried you through the night, He will guide you through the day. Fear may visit you again tomorrow, but it will find a different version of you, one who has seen God's sustaining hand. Every encounter with divine faithfulness strengthens your resolve. Eventually, fear loses its language. It stops knowing how to reach you. You become untouchable, not because life gets easier, but because your faith matures. Psalm 3, therefore, is not just David's testimony. It's a blueprint for every believer's victory over fear. It shows that rest is stronger than resistance, that faith is louder than fear, that divine protection is not postponed until heaven. It's available here, now, in every heartbeat sustained by grace. So when fear rises tonight, let faith rise higher. When voices say, there is no help for you, respond, but you, O Lord, are my shield. Aye. When anxiety surrounds you, surround yourself with worship. When sleep feels impossible, remember that your rest is a form of warfare. Your surrender invites divine intervention. Every night you sleep in faith, you testify to this world that you belong to a kingdom unshaken by chaos. You become a living psalm, a melody of trust in a world of noise. If these words strengthened your heart, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Be part of a community where faith overcomes fear and where every storm becomes proof that God still fights for those who rest in Him. The morning after the battle, rising in the strength of God. When David wrote, "I awoke for the Lord sustained me," he was declaring more than gratitude for another dawn. He was bearing witness to the mystery of divine endurance. There is something profoundly sacred in waking up after a night that should have broken you. Each sunrise becomes a testimony that your enemies did not prevail, that despair did not bury you, that darkness did not consume you. The morning becomes proof that the invisible hand of God was working while you rested. In that first breath of daylight lies a quiet but powerful victory. The triumph of faith over fear, of divine purpose over human frailty. When the psalmist rose from sleep, he rose not by strength of body, but by strength of spirit. He had laid down surrounded by threat, but he awoke surrounded by grace. This is what happens when a believer learns to rest under God's protection. You rise stronger than you were when you laid down. The night represents every season of uncertainty, every chapter of sorrow, every silence that tests your faith. It is the place where prayers seem unanswered and promises feel delayed. Yet the morning comes, not because you earned it, but because mercy never sleeps. The same God who watched over David as he fled barefoot through the wilderness watches over you when life strips you of comfort and stability. He restores your strength in secret. You cannot see the renewal as it happens, but when dawn arrives, your heart feels different. Peace has replaced panic, calm has replaced confusion, and though nothing outside you has changed, everything inside you has. That is the miracle of divine sustenance. To awake after the night of trial is to experience resurrection in miniature. Every morning mirrors the empty tomb, proof that death, despair, and defeat never have the final word. David's enemies had plotted to strike while he slept, but they forgot that the one who guards Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. The same truth covers you. While others may strategize against your peace, God interrupts their plans with His divine timing. You cannot count how many dangers He has already cancelled before you ever face them. There are conversations you never heard because He silenced them. There are attacks you never saw because He deflected them. There are traps you never stepped into because His wisdom guided you another way. When you wake after a long season of fear or spiritual attack, you may not immediately feel triumphant. Often you feel weary, uncertain, even hesitant. But that is precisely when the Lord begins to remind you that your survival itself is victory. You are still here, and that means purpose remains. The breath in your lungs is God's signature that the story continues. Your rising is not a coincidence. It is the result of divine warfare fought on your behalf. Heaven has moved mountains in silence just to see you rise again in faith. David's morning was not free of danger. Absalom still pursued him. Yet something had changed within. His confidence had returned, his focus restored. Fear had been dethroned. This transformation is the heart of Psalm 3. Not that your external world becomes easier, but that your internal world becomes unshakable. God's greatest miracles often begin within before they manifest without. The true enemy He strikes down is not always the one before your eyes, but the one whispering in your mind, the voice that says, "You will not make it," or "God has forgotten you." Indeed, when that lie is silenced, no visible enemy can destroy you. As the sun rises, David begins to speak with a new authority. "I will not be afraid of 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me round about." This is not arrogance, but awakening. It is the realization that divine protection is not partial. It is absolute. God is not a half shield. He is an all-encompassing defense. When the Lord is your covering, no number of enemies matters. The armies of men cannot penetrate the presence of God. This awareness transforms the way you live. You stop measuring threats and start magnifying faith. You stop counting enemies and start counting mercies. The morning after the battle is a sacred transition. It is where the believer moves from survival to strength. The tears of the night become the dew of renewal. The broken heart becomes the vessel of new courage. What tried to destroy you becomes the soil from which greater faith grows. God uses the very darkness that frightened you to reveal how luminous His presence truly is. He does not merely remove fear, He transforms it into testimony. There is a spiritual rhythm in Psalm 3 that mirrors life itself. Danger, prayer, rest, awakening, declaration. Each believer walks through this cycle many times. The danger humbles you, the prayer anchors you, the rest heals you, the awakening empowers you, and the declaration restores your authority. Every time you complete this cycle, your faith becomes deeper, steadier, more unbreakable. Eventually, you learn to face the next night without panic, because you remember the dawn that followed the last one. That is spiritual maturity, the memory of past faithfulness producing present confidence. The world often misunderstands peace. It thinks peace is the absence of conflict, but divine peace is the presence of assurance in the midst of conflict. When you walk in that peace, you no longer fear the night, because you know that morning is inevitable. God's promises are not seasonal, they are eternal. Just as the earth rotates faithfully toward sunrise, so every soul anchored in Him will eventually turn toward light. In the morning of restoration, God often gives fresh perspective. You begin to see why certain things happened, why certain people left, why certain doors closed. The clarity of dawn reveals the purpose hidden in the pain. Many of the things that frightened you in darkness lose their power when exposed to light. Worry shrinks when viewed through revelation. What once seemed unbearable now becomes understandable. You realize that every delay was protection, every detour preparation, every loss purification. David's journey through Psalm 3 also teaches that gratitude is the proper response to deliverance. When you awake sustained, do not rush past that miracle. Pause. Acknowledge the God who watched while you slept. Gratitude deepens the impact of grace. It transforms simple awareness into lasting worship. When you begin each morning with thanksgiving, you draw strength from remembrance. The soul that forgets God's protection quickly returns to fear. The soul that remembers it walks boldly through anything. Even as the psalm closes with the line, "Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing is upon your people." David shifts from personal to communal prayer. He understands that the victory God grants one believer strengthens the whole body. Your deliverance is never just about you. It becomes a testimony that strengthens others. When God sustains you through the night, He intends your story to awaken hope in those still trembling in the dark. Every victory becomes a torch passed from one soul to another. Imagine the scene: a fugitive king, betrayed by his own blood, chased by thousands, yet at dawn standing upright, declaring God's victory. That image alone dismantles the pride of darkness. It shows that the human spirit, when sustained by divine power, cannot be broken. You carry that same resilience. You may not wear a crown of gold, but you bear a crown of grace. Every time you rise after a night of anguish, heaven calls you victorious. When you live with this awareness, your mornings change. You begin to approach each day as proof of divine faithfulness. You stop waking in dread and start waking in worship. Each sunrise becomes an altar. You realize that every hour you live is borrowed light, given by the God who never stopped believing in your purpose even when you doubted it yourself. There is a divine principle hidden in this psalm. you can rest because God never does. He is always active, always present, always defending. When you close your eyes in faith, his eyes remain open in vigilance. He does not rest because he wants you to. That is the rhythm of grace, divine labor securing human peace. The morning after the battle also calls for renewed commitment. You cannot rise from divine deliverance and return to the same patterns that brought fear. God preserves you not only to comfort you, but to transform you. After every night of trial, there must be a morning of realignment. Renew your devotion, your discipline, your dependence. When you rise, rise into obedience. Use the new day to walk differently than the last. That is how sustained grace becomes sustained growth. One of the most profound aspects of this psalm is that David's external situation was still unresolved, yet he speaks as if victory has already manifested. This shows that victory begins as revelation before it becomes reality. You must learn to speak from the finished perspective of faith even when circumstances lag behind. The enemy may still surround, but God's promise already surrounds more deeply. Speak from the promise, not from the pressure. That is how you live as one who has already overcome. If you listen carefully, you will notice that David's tone in the latter verses carries the resonance of peace. Not fragile peace that can be stolen, but anchored peace that endures. That is the peace you are called to live in. It is the peace Jesus later described as not of this world, unbothered by chaos, unmoved by noise. It is the same peace that allows saints to sleep in storms, prophets to rest in prisons, and believers to sing in battle. The morning light in Psalm 3 is also prophetic. It points toward the ultimate dawn, the resurrection of Christ. David's personal experience becomes a shadow of what God would later accomplish for all humanity. When Jesus lay in the tomb, surrounded by darkness and silence, the Father was still working. And on the third morning, he awoke. Not because sleep ended, but because salvation began. Every believer who rises after despair participates in that same resurrection rhythm. The God who sustained David sustains you with the same power that raised Jesus from the dead. That is why the believer can look at every new day with sacred awe. Morning is not routine, it is revelation. It whispers, "You are alive because God still has purpose in you." The same divine breath that spoke light into existence breathes into you at dawn. You awaken not just to another day, but to another chance to reflect His glory in the land of the living. It is easy to forget this when life feels repetitive or burdens heavy. But remember, if the Lord has kept you through the night, He intends to use you in the day. Every awakening is an assignment. Every moment of peace is preparation for purpose. You are not preserved to be passive. You are preserved to participate in His plan. The morning after your battle is not just for recovery, but for revelation. As David realized that the same God who struck his enemies could also restore his calling, you too must realize that divine protection is only the beginning. God sustains you so you can become a sustainer to others. He rescues you so you can carry rescue to those still trapped in fear. Your peace is meant to overflow. When you rise from your own night, you carry authority over it. You understand what darkness feels like, so you can guide others through it. The comfort you received becomes your ministry. This is how God redeems pain. He turns survivors into shepherds. Every night you overcome increases your capacity to comfort. As you continue your journey, remember that every future night will carry the same truth. The Lord will sustain you again. You never outgrow dependence. You only deepen it. The mature believer is not the one who never fears, but the one who knows exactly where to place fear when it comes, at the feet of the Almighty. So let every morning remind you of your covenant. As long as you wake, God's purpose remains. Let gratitude guide your thoughts, let peace guard your mind, and let faith lead your steps. You may still face enemies, but they will fall as before, for the Lord who sustained you once will sustain you again. The rhythm of his protection does not weaken with time. It grows stronger as your trust deepens. The morning after the battle is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of testimony. Those who doubted you will see the hand of God upon you. Those who mocked your faith will witness your peace. Your stability will become your strongest sermon. The very people who thought you would collapse will see you rise with calm authority, walking through fire yet unburned. This is the legacy of Psalm 3, not just deliverance, but demonstration. God does not save you in secret. He lets the world see his faithfulness through your endurance. You become a living example of what it means to be sustained by the eternal. And every time you speak of his protection, you echo David's declaration across centuries, "The Lord sustained me." The power of this psalm continues in every believer who learns to rest, rise, and rejoice in God's faithfulness. It is the anthem of those who have walked through darkness and found that the night cannot kill what heaven keeps alive. It is the melody of souls who have discovered that God's presence is more permanent than any problem. So rise, child of God. Rise not just from your bed, but from your fear. Rise with the strength of peace, with the clarity of gratitude, with the assurance that you are watched, loved, and guarded by a presence that never sleeps. Every morning that finds you breathing is another reminder that victory belongs to the Lord, and that no weapon formed against your peace can prosper. Sleep may have carried your weakness, but awakening carries his strength. You are not the same person who laid down last night. You are renewed, restored, and ready. The same God who sustained David sustains you now, not because of your worthiness, but because of his faithfulness. If this message renewed your spirit, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, so you may continue walking with us through the living word that transforms fear into faith, darkness into dawn, and every restless night into a story of divine victory. Salvation belongs to the Lord, resting in his final word. There is a moment in every believer's journey when the soul finally understands that deliverance does not depend on human effort. It does not belong to circumstance, luck, or strength. It belongs to God alone. When David concludes Psalm 3 with the declaration, "Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing is upon your people," he is not merely ending a prayer, he is proclaiming a revelation. After running, fearing, crying, and resting, he arrives at the truth that anchors all faith. Every victory, every breath, every escape from the shadow of death flows from the sovereign hand of God. Nothing else saves, nothing else sustains, nothing else endures. To reach this point of peace, David had to pass through the valley of fear. He had to experience the betrayal of his own blood, the rising of countless enemies, the long nights of uncertainty. But through it all, he learned that God's protection is not seasonal. It is eternal. That realization changes how you see every storm. When you finally know that salvation belongs to the Lord, you stop fighting for control and start resting in his authority. You no longer panic when surrounded because you understand that the outcome was decided before the battle began. The phrase, "Salvation belongs to the Lord," carries infinite depth. It means that rescue, redemption, and restoration are God's exclusive territory. It means no enemy can outmaneuver his wisdom, no curse can override his will, no darkness can outlast his light. It means that the same voice that spoke creation into existence is the voice that declares, "Peace, be still," over your chaos. When God claims ownership of your salvation, he also assumes responsibility for your safety. The outcome of your life is not in the hands of those who rise against you, but in the hands of the one who raises you up. This truth transforms fear into worship. When you realize that you are not the author of your deliverance, you stop striving and start praising. You no longer measure your strength against the size of your trial. You measure your trial against the size of your God. That shift in perception is what gives you peace, while others tremble. It is what allows you to rest even when storms rage, because you know the one who commands the winds. David's confidence in this psalm was not built on the absence of enemies, but on the presence of God. Salvation belongs to the Lord means that no enemy can write your ending. Others may plan harm, but they do not have permission to define your future. Only God has the final word. And his word over you is not defeat. It is deliverance. When you rest in this truth, something inside you changes permanently. You stop reacting to life as if everything depends on you. You start walking in quiet assurance. You start understanding that your tears are seen, your fears are known, and your destiny is guarded. You begin to interpret every closed door, every delay, every detour, not as punishment, but as protection. The sovereignty of God becomes your comfort, not your question. Psalm 3 teaches that salvation is not just an event, but a continual process. God sustains, defends, restores, and renews daily. Each morning you awaken is a fresh expression of his saving power. When David says, "Your blessing is upon your people," he's declaring that divine favor is not random or occasional. It is the constant atmosphere around those who belong to God. Even when you do not feel it, it surrounds you. The unseen blessing sustains you through unseen battles. To say salvation belongs to the Lord also means surrendering your need to understand every detail of his timing. God's ways are higher, his vision broader, his plan infinite. Sometimes the hardest act of faith is not in fighting, but in waiting. Waiting for the Lord to reveal how the night becomes morning, how the pain becomes purpose, how the loss becomes life. Waiting is not passive resignation. It is active trust. It is the posture of a soul that knows who holds the clock of eternity. David's declaration is also prophetic. When he says salvation belongs to the Lord, he is foreshadowing the ultimate salvation through Christ. The son of David, centuries later, would sleep in a borrowed tomb while God struck down the final enemy, death itself. That resurrection morning became the eternal fulfillment of this psalm. The same pattern of rest, divine intervention, and awakening that David experienced on earth was completed in Jesus forever. Through him, the believer's rest is no longer temporary, it is eternal security. To live with this awareness is to live free. You are no longer enslaved to anxiety, because you understand that no threat can overturn divine ownership. The storms of life may roar, but they are still under command. The enemies may rise, but they are still numbered. You are sustained, not because the world is gentle, but because your God is great. Salvation belonging to the Lord also means that vengeance belongs to him. You no longer need to defend yourself against false accusations or human injustice. The same God who sustains your breath will vindicate your name in his time. The believer's peace flows from this assurance that God's justice may be delayed, but it is never denied. He settles every account in perfect measure. While you rest, he restores balance. The soul that truly grasps this truth becomes unshakable. You begin to see battles differently. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start saying, "Use me." You understand that every hardship is an opportunity for God to reveal his salvation again. What once terrified you now becomes the platform for his glory. You no longer interpret opposition as a curse, but as the context in which divine power manifests. This is why David ends with blessing. Your blessing is upon your people. The same hand that strikes down enemies also lifts up the faithful. The same voice that silences storms speaks peace into the hearts of those who trust. The blessing of God is not confined to material prosperity or visible success. It is the inner stability that no crisis can shake. It is the quiet knowing that no matter what happens, you are held. That blessing follows you into every valley, accompanies you in every exile, and crowns you in every restoration. When you walk in that blessing, you carry a different presence. People sense peace around you because you have learned to rest in divine ownership. You are no longer driven by fear of loss, because you know that what belongs to God cannot be stolen. You no longer seek validation from men, because your worth is rooted in heaven's approval. You live lighter, speak calmer, love deeper, and endure longer, because your anchor is not in circumstance, but in the unchanging nature of God. The message of Psalm 3 is ultimately the message of every believer's life. Danger rises, fear whispers, faith answers, rest follows, and God prevails. The cycle repeats across generations, but the conclusion never changes. Salvation belongs to the Lord. This truth is the anthem of saints, the shield of the suffering, the hope of the hopeless. It is what allows martyrs to sing, mothers to endure, prophets to persevere, and children of God to sleep in peace. To sleep in peace while enemies rise requires more than courage. It requires revelation. You must know that God is not reactive, He is proactive. He saw every battle before you faced it. He arranged every outcome before it began. Nothing catches Him by surprise, and nothing can outpace His plan. The same God who began your story will finish it with glory. The world around you will continue to change, but the sovereignty of God will not. Nations will rise and fall, seasons will shift, people will come and go, but the shield of the Lord remains. The faith that sustained David will sustain you. The hand that lifted him will lift you. The voice that called him out of despair calls you now to rest, to trust, to believe. If salvation belongs to the Lord, then fear belongs nowhere near your heart. Anxiety loses its foundation, for you are not the author of your story. The pressure to control, to predict, to force outcomes dissolves in the presence of divine sovereignty. You realize that peace is not something you achieve, it is something you inherit when you belong to Him. So tonight, as you prepare to rest again, remember, you do not close your eyes in uncertainty, you close them in confidence. The same God who struck down your enemies yesterday guards your tomorrow. You are not falling into darkness, you are falling into the hands of mercy. Each night becomes a rehearsal for eternity, the quiet assurance that the Lord who sustains you now will sustain you forever. Your sleep is not an act of weakness, but of worship. Every breath you take in rest is a hymn that says, "I trust you, Lord." Every dream becomes a canvas where heaven paints peace. Every awakening becomes a reminder that you are not here by accident, but by providence. You are the proof that salvation still belongs to the Lord. This psalm, though ancient, breathes through your life today. It tells your story in divine rhythm. Rising enemies, trembling heart, divine shield, peaceful rest, glorious awakening, and final declaration. You are living the same pattern that David lived because the same God defends you. His shield has not weakened with time. His promise has not faded with centuries. The Lord still sustains, still delivers, still blesses. Even now, as you read these words, His Spirit surrounds you. The fears that once spoke loudly grow silent before His presence. The anxieties that once consumed your nights lose power under His gaze. The voice of peace whispers again, "Be still, for salvation belongs to me." And when that voice speaks, every other voice must bow. Let that truth settle deep into your soul. You are not fighting alone. You are not surviving by chance. You are not forgotten. You are sustained by a love that neither sleeps nor slumbers. You are guarded by an authority that neither falters nor fails. Salvation is not borrowed, it is secured, and it bears your name, written in the eternal covenant of grace. So rise each day with courage, walk through life with calm, sleep each night with trust. The one who has carried you this far will carry you still. The Lord's protection is your inheritance, His peace your atmosphere, His salvation your everlasting security. If these words have strengthened your faith, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, so you may continue walking with us through the living Psalms, where fear ends, faith awakens, and the eternal truth resounds. Salvation belongs to the Lord.